Hello fellow writers, my name's Laura and welcome to Learn to Writer, the channel where we discuss the mental challenges of being a writer. Now, we all want to be more productive writers, but almost everyone completely ignores a very important aspect of productivity. As writers, more productivity generally means more words written, but what people neglect to think about is what goes into being able to write. Most of the time we just focus on the output, writing more words, or we spend more time at the task in order to complete more output. But you see, productivity is the efficiency of input versus output. Okay, calm down, hold on. I know that this is a big equation. It looks like math. It is math, but it's not really math. But let's say for a moment that you're making a cake. You've gathered the ingredients according to your recipe, flour, sugar, baking soda. You get the tools you need, bowl, whisk, cake pan, oven. You follow the recipe and you get a cake. You took your inputs, you generated an output. Now, imagine for a moment that you've made a cake multiple times. Maybe you really like cakes, maybe you really like making cakes for friends and family for birthdays. You do the exact same thing as before, where you're gathering your ingredients, your tools, but this time, you are adding something else. You have experience as a baker. Since you've made cakes before, you're probably moving with far more confidence around the kitchen. You don't necessarily have to look at the recipe, and you know that mixing certain things in order leads to less mess and fewer steps. So you do all of this, and you get a cake. You've got the same inputs, you've got the same tools, but adding in that experience generated the output more quickly. You didn't have to put as much effort or as much time into making the cake in order to get the output of a cake. Now, let's imagine that you're a professional baker. You've made hundreds of cakes and you have to make hundreds more today. You've invested in one of those large mixers so you can make larger batches of batter at a time. You're buying your ingredients in bulk, like those huge cartons of eggs, where they're all stacked on top of each, like you've got eggs, right? You've also got more than one oven, and you've got so much more experience because you've made hundreds of cakes before, right? You've got the recipe down to a science, and you're able to create those 100 cakes far more easily than any home baker could do. Same ingredients, your tools are improved, but your experience has given you your baker's intuition, which allows you to create far quicker and more efficient output. Much higher productivity in the making of the cakes. Man, now I want cake. So now we're going to go back to our equation, and we're going to think about this in terms of writing. What as writers do we input in order to output words? I would say our ingredients are the ideas in our brain. These are generated by spending mental energy. Tools are obviously whatever you're using to record your words. So if you're using a computer, if you're using Scrivener, or if you're using a notepad and a pen or a pencil. And of course, you have your writer's intuition, which is your experience with writing. Your knowledge of story structure, your experience with writing and reading, tips, tricks, everything you've ever learned as a writer. So all these things go into us being able to produce words at any given time. But really, not many of them are manipulatable in the moment. Over time, you're going to be generating more experience. Your writer's intuition will increase, your experience will increase. You might get a new tool every now and then, but for the most part, as writers, we kind of figure out what process we like to do and we stick with that. The main limiting factor for writing input is mental energy. Running out of mental energy is like running out of eggs when you're making a cake. You're out of an essential ingredient. Only you can't just go to the store and buy more mental energy. Added to that, we use mental energy throughout the day, not just on writing. So one of the things you have to ask yourself when you're trying to increase your writing productivity is whether or not you have the mental energy to write. And sometimes the answer is no. But because we often don't think about mental energy as being an input, we push forward anyway. We want to write, and so we sit down to write because in general, you're like, words come out of mouth, words come out of brain, and then put them there. And then when we aren't able to do that, it doesn't occur to us necessarily why that is. One time, I was in the midst of NaNoWriMo and I fell behind on my word count. So I pushed really, really hard, and I wrote 4,573 words in a single day. That is the most words that I have ever written in a single day. I couldn't write for the rest of the week. So the first tip for this video on how to increase your productivity is what I had to learn at that time, is that when you use up all of your mental energy, you have to rest. In our society, the expectation is always more output. This happens at work, this happens within our own expectations, more, right? And we do not prioritize rest. And you can push, and you probably often do push, like I did when I was behind on NaNoWriMo, and like I do in my job, and when, I've got other things that I want to do. But when you're out of mental energy, you're not getting as much writing done as you could be. You might be producing, but your productivity goes down. You're spending more time and more energy, and you're getting fewer and less quality words. So rest. Go outside, watch TV, play video games, engage with your dependents or your friends, do things that recharge you. Though it's not as easy or obvious to measure, resting will increase your productivity. It is the biggest thing that you can do for yourself at any given time in order to increase your productivity. So tip number 2 is going to be learning how you are most naturally productive and lean into that. Some people write a little bit every day. Some people write a whole bunch in one day and then not for a couple of days. Some people plan out their story mostly in their heads. Other people just start writing and eventually find the right words. Some people write in the morning, some people write in the evenings, some people write on the bus, on their way to and from work. You want to figure out what your own preferences are and what your limits are so that you can be the most productive with your time as you can be. Having a time or a place that you sit down and write can decrease the amount of mental energy it takes to sit down and focus on writing. With ADHD, I can waste a lot of time and my mental energy because my mind always wants to write later. Or when I sit down and actually try and start writing, I can get distracted very easily by other things that are going on. And tip 3, don't waste mental energy on side quests. If you're the type of person who's going to go down a research rabbit hole, then don't research when you're trying to output words. You don't need to know what type of wood was used in desks in the Joseon era to write your story right now. You can put it in brackets and come back to it later. Also, really don't be afraid to write out of order. I get tons of people who say that they can't do this, that it has to all be in order, and so they have to write this scene before that scene. But I think it's more likely that they just don't have practice doing it, and they just think it's going to be too confusing. I feel like it's a little bit worse when you're sitting there and just not having any output because you really can't get this one scene right, than it would be to have to go back and do some extra editing in order to make everything line up right. I find that my most important scenes are ones that I usually have to go back to and rewrite over and over again until I actually get them correct. Anytime that you might have something that comes up that is stealing a whole bunch of your mental energy because you think that it has to be done a certain way, try doing it a different way. Tip 4 is similar to this in that you don't want to spend a whole bunch of mental energy on unimportant world building. Using your brackets is really your friend for things like this, for proper names, for details, things that are unimportant to the flow of the story. Now, if you can just choose a name and keep going, that's fine. But if you need to look up the ancient meaning of the name or 100 and then pick the exact right one in order to name the person right the first time, put a placeholder, move on. This is the same for unimportant world building. If you don't need to have that detail right now for plot reasons, to actually write the plot that is going on, throw it in brackets and move on. And brackets are great if you're not sure how to write something yet, like the choreography of a fight or the details of how heroes will escape from a particular encounter, or even if you can't think of the specific word that you want. So you can see an example here where I was writing along and I did not have names for the people that was going in here, and I just put name. It's not important to the story who these people are, they're just villagers. Just doing that and not getting stuck up on, okay, I have to go come up with 2 villagers' names and all that kind of stuff. That's saving me mental energy. And never underestimate the value of what I call pseudocode. If you're stuck on something, how something happens, just write that it happens and then move on. The how, the actual writing, the making it pretty, those are all done in editing. So here you can see a little bit of a short story that I was working on where there was a bunch of action happening and I didn't want to get dragged down in the details of how that was happening or any of the making the sentences really nice, right? I was trying to get this is what happens and then this is what happens next. And so you can see if you read through this, the sentences are choppy, they're not all that great. I move into where I'm literally writing a line this happens, a line this happens, a line this happens, a line this happens. That's allowing me to get through the story. That is using way less mental energy than if I was to sit down and be like, okay, I really have to figure out exactly how this thing happens right now. I happen to love editing, so this works very well for me because you can come back in editing mode. Your expected output is different when you're editing. The same way it would be if you were in research mode. You know, when we say, don't go and do that research right now, you come back with that later. If you are trying to output words, you want to be able to output as many words as you can. So by using all of these tips together, you'll be able to not only restore your mental energy, but use your mental energy more efficiently when you are trying to use it in order to create an output. So rest when you need to rest, use your mental energy more efficiently, and you will find that your productivity increases in no time. So if you like this video, go ahead and like this video. And I will see you guys in the next one. Okay, bye-bye.